I've worked cases that would ice the back of your neck, home invasions where no window was broken, suicides that didn't line up, a kid who swore he met his dead uncle in the Kroger parking lot and described the scar above the man's lip in perfect detail. Northeast Ohio will do that to you if you let it. Peel back the ordinary like cheap wallpaper and show you what was always underneath. People think Cleveland and steel. I think townships with names that sound like last names. 2-lane roads that run straight into water, and fog that chooses where it wants to be. My name doesn't matter. I'm a detective, and this is the only story that still makes me lock my windows on windless nights. It started in early November, the kind that comes with low clouds and soft rain that flicks the windshield with the patience of a metronome. The trees along Route 84 were down to black bones, and the Lake Erie had that hammered lead look, as if someone had taken a god-sized mallet to a sheet of pewter. The call came from a dispatcher who never used my name unless she had to. "Detective, you're going to want to come up to Wicks Point." "Fishers again?" I asked. Wicks Point was a hook of land near Madison where teenagers went to drink and old men went to not drink. This time of year it was just wind and a collapsing gazebo. "Missing person," she said. "Girl. Went out with her dad to watch the lake." He turned around and she was gone. No tire tracks. No footprints except hers. I turned off the radio. The farmlands opened and closed around me. Fields flat as a lie, then sudden dips into stands of willow. When I arrived, blue strobes turned the water into a broken mirror. The father sat on a picnic bench, hands folded like he was praying into them. A deputy Nate stood near the lip of the bluff with a flashlight pointed straight down, as if light could command water to return what it wanted. "Name?" I asked. "Emily," the father said without looking up. "Emily Marrow. Mr. Marrow, tell me exactly what happened." "No edits." He took a breath that seemed to shiver halfway down his ribs. She wanted to see the lake with ice on it. I told her it doesn't freeze this early, not out there. We parked. She ran to the stairs. I yelled for her to slow down. She did. I turned to grab the thermos. I swear just a second, and then she wasn't on the stairs anymore. He pointed to the steps cut into the bluff railing, slick with wet and splinters. I took the beam from Nate and panned it. The sand below lay smooth, a wet canvas with nothing drawn on it. Then, a trio of small ovals near the bottom of the stairs. Shoes, each print clean, crisp-edged, toes pointed toward the water. After that, nothing. No smears, no tumble of slid sand, no return prints. Just the dark sheen of wet shoreline and the lake breathing. "She didn't drown here," Nate said, like he needed to say it out loud to make it true. "There be drag. There be something." Wind moved across the water in a single long shiver and then stopped. It was the stoppage that bothered me. The lake doesn't take orders, not from weather, not from men. When it pauses, I pay attention. We pulled drones anyway, dipped cameras along the shallows. Divers wouldn't go until morning. You don't put a person into that slate and ask them to be smarter than it is. We found the scarf caught in burrs halfway down the trail purple, with those silver stars girls like to wear when they start wanting to be seen. The father recognized it without touching it. I bagged it, wrote the time, and felt the thin hum in the back of my teeth that tells me a case has already decided what it's going to be. Back at the station, the map of the lakeshore looked like a heart monitor. All those points of interest marked in red. Wicks Point wasn't the first red we put on paper. There had been 2 boys in October who didn't make the news because they came back. Both said they'd gotten turned around. Both had the same triangle of bruises along the collarbone, like something with narrow fingers had steadied them too hard. One boy wouldn't stop crying. The other wouldn't cry at all, and I knew from experience which one was in more trouble. Emily didn't come back that night. The morning brought volunteers with platters of muffins and a helicopter with a camera that could count the whiskers on a raccoon from 200 feet. We traced the beach east and west until the water lifted white knuckles and made us step back. By noon, the rain came harder, slanting in on a diagonal that scratched like sand. At 3, the wind changed. It came in off the lake and smelted the town down to something older rope, tar, smoke, old logs. A retired fisherman named Burke wandered over to me at the staging table and stood too close. He had the tobacco throat and the soft, careful hands that men have who've worked with nets. "You looking in the wrong place," he said softly. "Where should we look, Mr. Burke?" He nodded at the water like he was acknowledging an introduction. "Under. No one's diving in this," I told him. "Not until it settles." He shook his head, eyes on the water. "I don't mean down. I mean under." She went where the map stops printing. Old folks called it the underline. Most don't say it now. Doesn't matter if you say a thing. It hears its own name. "Okay," I said, because sometimes you say okay to keep a man talking. "My father used to tell a story," Burke went on, "about the winter of '58. Ice came, thick and mean, and then it went, and then it came back wrong. They found animal prints on it, deer, dog, raccoon, and at the end of each trail, there was nothing. Like the creature lifted off. They knew better. The ice took them from underneath." He looked at me to see if I was following. I nodded as if I was. He tapped the air once, 2 fingers, as if stamping a document you couldn't see. "Underline. That's the scene you're feeling. It's where this lake stops agreeing with us about what's real." By sunset, the volunteers had peeled off. Jobs, kids, babysitters, the gravity of normal life reclaiming bodies from the field. I stood under the bluff and listened. The lake and I have an arrangement. When it speaks in one voice, I let it be. When it speaks in 2, I get closer. That evening, it spoke in that second voice. There was the usual lap and breathe, and then behind it, a tone like a wet bottle being played with a thumb and forefinger. Not loud, persisting. I walked the shoreline west where the bluffs droop down and rocks, the size of refrigerators, sit like retired animals. Someone had built a stack of flat stones there, 3 wide, 3 high, one of those balanced things you see hikers make when they want to pretend they've added a chapter to the Bible. The rain had rounded the edges, made them look more deliberate. I reached out and touched the top rock with 1 finger, and the sound from the lake changed, like a whisper that thinks you answered it. I didn't sleep. I went home and sat in the kitchen with the lights off and the radio turned to a jazz station that only plays at night. I let the trumpet player teach my heart how to beat slower. Around 3, I must have gone slack because at 3:17 the scanner spit out a call that banged through my skull like a hammer. Male voice, eastern edge of Madison Township, screaming into the receiver about someone at his back door with wet hands, tapping. When the deputies got there, the patio was empty, but for a line of water as thin as the mark on your wrist where a watch sits. The water didn't come from outside. It ran from the door to the kitchen sink and then stopped. I pulled the records the next morning. Drownings, near drownings, missing along the lake. I marked the dates. There were the usual summer uglies and winter unfortunates. Then there was a little cluster right around this week for the last 27 years. Leaves off trees. Water not yet iced. 5-day span. I asked dispatch to run me any 911 calls with tapping, wet, lake, door. She came back with 7 in that same window across 2 decades. Nobody had ever put them together because why would you? People tap your door. Water leaks. Life is just coincidences until you live long enough to see the ones that aren't. On the 3rd day, we found a shoe. It was Emily's light-up sole, blue with a strip of Velcro wadded with lint. It lay on the inside lip of a culvert that drains out just east of the point, right where the water pretends to be still before it decides to be a mouth. We pulled the grate. We sent the camera. The feed came back with the smooth, close-up indifference of concrete tunnels. Silt. a crayfish that reared like a tiny idiot. Then, 3 vertical grooves on the concrete, each an inch apart, running straight down into darkness, as if someone had sunk long fingers into the wall and slid, or as if something with long fingers had tried not to be dragged. The mother came to see me that night. Her eyes were working their way toward the kind of dry that doesn't get wet again for months. She carried a bag of cookies for the squad that no one would touch because cookies make you guilty when you can't find a child. "Detectives," she said. "They keep telling me to rest. What do I do with my hands if I'm resting?" I nodded because the question wasn't for answering. She folded her arms, then unfolded them, then looked around like she wanted to ask for a room where the lake couldn't hear her. I took her to the interview space we use for teenagers when we want to seem kinder than we are, lamps with shades. Chairs that don't scoop your shoulders like interrogation does. She loved the water, she said, which is the kind of sentence parents say when they want to blame themselves in a way you can't argue with. She told me it sounded different this week. How? Like it was singing under its breath. She said it was like when a person hums and keeps their mouth closed. I knew that sound. I was pretty sure I'd heard it the night before near those stacked stones. I didn't tell her that because it would make me interesting to the wrong person myself. Instead, I promised what we always promise. More of everything. More feet on the ground, more calls, more looking in places we'd already looked. She left the cookies and told me it would be okay if no one ate them. I went back to the point alone. I went at the hour when towns get rearranged, around midnight, after the last bar empties, but before the guys who work the early shift start their coffee. The air had that November clarity that lets you see the wires between things. The stones were still stacked. The rain had polished them, made the dark darker. I crouched, feeling the ground through the knees of my jeans, and put both my palms on the top stone. The first feeling was pressure, not on my hands, but on my teeth again. That soft insistence at the back molars, like biting foil. The second feeling was of being measured, like someone lining up a tape at the top of my head and letting it fall to my shoes. The third feeling was plain old fear, huge, ghostly, blank open water at night, and me out here handling rocks like a boy who needed to prove something. I took my hands off, and the fear receded by half. I put them back, and it came to full. That was enough. I told the lake we'd talk when there was light, and backed up the bluff without turning my back. The fourth day is the one that defines a search. If you find nothing, it becomes a recovery. If you find something, it becomes the thing the town will talk about every year when the leaves start to go. At 9:12 a.m., a retired teacher walking her dog near the Geneva on the lake strip, where the shuttered arcades look like broken teeth, called in a child. The boy sat on the curb in front of a boarded-up ski ball, dripping. His eyes were shut. His mouth was open, just a little. His hands were pruny the way hands get when you've been in a bath too long. He wore a t-shirt in November. No shoes, no socks. We thought at first it was one of the kids who'd run away from the shelter up in Ashtabula. Then I knelt and looked at him and saw the necklace. It was a lanyard with a plastic sleeve. Inside was a library card. Name, Emily Marrow. He woke up like he'd been unplugged and plugged back in. One inhalation that shook, and then focus. He looked at me, and the boys who have been to bad places look through you for a second before they correct. "What's your name?" I asked. "Josh," he whispered. He had sand pasted along the arc of his ear like frost. "Josh, where did you get that?" I tapped the card. He looked down as if he'd forgotten it was there, and something like confusion and guilt moved across his face at the same time. "She gave it to me," he said, "so I'd find the library. She said libraries are the opposite of water." "Who?" I asked, though I knew. "The girl," he said. "She told me not to look when the singing starts." He swallowed. "People who have swallowed lake water always swallow once like that, a hard single motion." I looked anyway. It was under the stairs and it put its hands on my shoulders and it said my name wrong. What did it call you? He thought, brows furrowing the way kids do when they're trying to remember if they remembered right. It called me Just, like just you. He looked out at nothing, a wet dog smell rising off him, clean and animal. She said it doesn't say you're allowed to go. It stops wanting you. So you go? We took him to the hospital. His temperature ran low by 3 degrees all day and then corrected itself at dusk, like the lake had decided. Its hold wasn't worth the trouble. He drew for the nurse because kids speak with crayons what they won't say with tongues. He drew stairs, a rectangle for a culvert, and a dark underlined shape under the line of water that, in the crude economy of kid drawing, was very clear about having hands. That night I drove to the county records office and used my badge to get into rooms that still smell like carbon paper. I pulled the 1958 winter storm files because of Burke's story. I pulled the 1908 fire along the coast because people whispered about that one in the bars with the old carpet. And I pulled a folder that wasn't labeled anything, just a slab of manila that had collected odds and unclassifiable ends. Inside was a letter from 1897, written by a lighthouse keeper who worked a station that no longer existed, out on a spit that had been eaten away since. He wrote about nights when the lake stood up like a dog and sniffed the light. He wrote about hearing sound through the fog that matched the key of his wife's humming. He wrote about claw-ward tracks in ice that ended at holes that were not round and not square, and about a pile of stones the locals stacked each fall and knocked down every spring, and how both actions made the wind change. I turned off the light and listened because old paper has a noise. It's like the soft, unashamed cracking of knuckles. I put the letter back exactly where I found it because the kind of truth that belongs to a place doesn't do well under fluorescent glare. Then I drove to the point with a bag of rock salt from the trunk and the stubborn belief that if you don't know what else to do, you leave a sign you were there. I poured the salt in a single straight line across the top of the stairs. The wind shifted left. I poured a second line at the bottom where the prints had stopped. The air went still, and the sound under the water hushed like a scolded thing. I stood like an idiot with a bag of salt and wanted to laugh just to keep my courage from calcifying. Then someone said my name. Not my first name. Not the one my mother used when she was proud or angry. A pocket name. The one only 3 people alive had permission to say. It came from behind me and below, and was shaped like my name would be if you said it under your breath. Mouth mostly closed, water in your throat. I did not turn. You learned that lesson early. If a voice that loves you comes from the wrong place, you let it call you a second time and a third, and you do not answer. You count your fingers. You count your teeth. You name what you can see. Bluff, stairs, salt, water. You force the world back into inventory. The voice said the pocket name again, and a small part of me tried to step forward because that's what you do when the dead remember your name right. I lifted one foot and put it back down. The sound, satisfied it had measured me, retreated in a thin, almost polite pull. I left the salt and drove home on back roads that seemed straight in daylight and serpentine after midnight. The 5th day, the divers went in. The sheriff came to watch because the sheriff comes when a child is involved. It's one of those things that isn't written anywhere. They dipped off the culvert and off the stairs. They followed the tunnels where the county's practical veins meet the lake's capricious heart. They found old shopping carts, a bicycle with fins of algae, a metal sign that said nitrogen monoxide swimming in cheerful red. They did not find a girl. They found, at the bottom of where those 3 grooves ran, a pocket of current that behaved like a loop in a rope. If you put your hand in, it took your hand and fed it right back to your wrist. Like it's tied to itself, the dive lead said, big-shouldered, solemn. Never seen water repeat like that. It's like a throat that never swallows. I stood on the stairs and looked at my 2 salt lines like a child's chalk. ridiculous, and exact. The humming sound rose and fell with spite. I remembered the stacked stones. I walked to them. I kicked the bottom rock. The stack sighed and collapsed as if relieved. The humming faded a fraction and then came back. Same pitch, meaner. I built the stack again. The wind veered. I knocked it down again. The lake pushed once, gentle, like testing my balance. "What are you doing?" Nate asked from the path, because from his angle I'm sure I looked like a man rearranging meaningless things to achieve a private miracle. I kept at it because sometimes you cooperate with superstition until it gives up something real. At dusk, we heard the scream. It came from east, not far. It was the scream of someone who has been quiet a very long time and then remembers there's a noise louder than water. The sheriff and I and 2 volunteers went running on the bluff path, bodies already tuned to the terrain from days of repetition. We found the boy Josh halfway down to the water, both hands on the railing, feet planted on a step. He was looking at the place where the sand met the dark, and in that dark something moved that wasn't reflection or fish. It rose with the slow confidence of a thing that believes in tides more than it believes in men. It had shoulders because I could see water break and fall from them. It had height. It had that grin that isn't a mouth so much as the idea of a mouth. But those aren't the parts that stick. What sticks is that it never blinked. Even though it didn't have eyes in the way we talk about eyes, it never blinked. It was looking without blinking, and I don't think it was looking at us. I think it was looking at the places behind us where our names hang in the air like frost and glow if you breathe on them. The sheriff lifted his rifle and then didn't because he had been hunting long enough to see what was true. If you shoot water, you get wet. If you shoot the shape of a person standing inside water, maybe you get yourself noticed by something that has been trying not to notice you yet. The thing took a step, and that step made a sound like books closing. Every instinct I had lined up along my spine and saluted, and I backed up without telling my legs to do it. The boy said one word. He said, just the way the lake had said his name wrong, and the shape stopped as if corrected. It tilted, and the tilt was curious, almost delighted. Then a voice behind us called, "Emily!" Clear and strangled and disobedient, the mother's voice. She'd been at the top of the bluff, watching us through the black bars of trees. I don't know how she got there so fast. My memory has already decided she was always there. The shape's head turned not like a person's, but like the lake's when wind draws a line across it. The humming rose to a pitch that made my molars whine. "Back," the sheriff said, "and there are words that law can use that are bigger than law, and that one worked." The boy tore himself from the rail like peeling a sticker and ran into the sheriff's body and stayed there. The thing moved forward again. 2 steps. 3. The water flinched around its knees. The sand took its feet like a man takes a friend's arm. It reached its hands, and those were hands, too long, too exact, and I saw along the pads of each finger 3 narrow grooves, like the ones in the culvert. And I realized with a little 2-beat of horror that the grooves were not something it made with force. They were something it left by being what it was. Then it stopped, not because of us, because the wind flipped. It came off the land in a sudden, hard line and hit the lake so square the surface wrinkled like a new bedspread. The shape shuddered not out of fear, out of distaste. The humming fell to a sulk. It stepped back, and when it did, the hands dissolved into what you would call water to avoid calling them anything else. It opened itself as if to speak, and the air around us answered first. Somewhere behind us, a door knocked once because sometimes the town participates. Then the shape took one long, narrow step backward and was gone like someone had inverted a glass. The boy cried. The mother walked down the steps and didn't fall because grief can be very sure-footed. She took the boy's face in both hands and looked at him, as if he were her daughter anyway, and she would take what she was given. She did not look at the water. I respected her for that because there are gifts you don't extend. We didn't find Emily. I can dress it up. Tell you about later calls and extra divies and the way. The town behaved like it had its lungs in a different place for the next month. I can make lists. Candles left on porches, stones stacked and knocked down, kitchens damp for no reason. An old map found in a trunk in a garage that shows a sandbar in 1876 that isn't there now, that looks suspiciously like an underline drawn by a bored clerk with a quill. I can tell you that every November since then I have stood at the stairs and poured a line of salt as if the lake cares, and as if it doesn't, and in either case as if I will do it anyway. But I cannot give you a body. The father dreams, he told me once, of a hallway with a window at the end that looks into water as if water belonged in the sky. He walks toward it and the floor becomes wet and then becomes the lake, and he keeps walking because he loved her before he learned what the lake could do, and love like that keeps walking without asking. He wakes with the smell of rope in his nose. He walks the kitchen and finds drops along the baseboard that are gone as soon as he turns on the light. I kept the lanyard with the library guard until I had to sign it over. Evidence goes where evidence goes. Before it left my desk, I took a picture of it and locked the picture in a folder I don't open. The library sent me a new card in her name, as if to say, if she makes it to a place where there are shelves, we will be ready. I keep that card in my wallet, and when it hums, I move it to the other pocket and wait for the hum to stop. People ask why I didn't quit after that. People who've never been steady in heavy water don't understand that you either learn to be heavier than yourself, or the water will think it can move you anytime it wants. I stayed. I drive the shoreline roads on purpose. I make inventory. I learn the names of goals that sit on parking lot lights, and I give them none of mine. I bring salt when there's no snow in the forecast, and nobody laughs. Not anymore. A year later, Burke the fisherman died with his boots on, not in the lake, but at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling and a crossword half unsolved. His daughter brought me a notebook he kept, the old man's crabbed hand making weather notes, boat names, lake moods as if it were a person he was courting. There, in the page for late autumn, he had written, "The seam sings." Then below it, "The stack is not a prayer. It's a doorbell." November comes back around no matter what you do. The town keeps its leaves longer now. I don't know why. Maybe the lake decided it likes color. On the anniversary, I went to the point after sundown. The water had gone glass again, too calm, as if it had arranged itself. I set the salt, one line top, one line bottom. I stacked the stones without deciding to. I waited. The hum came soft. I said out loud to no one, "I know," because I do. Because knowing and preventing are different sports, and some seasons you lose in one and have to win in the other. A wave came in that wasn't a wave so much as a lift of the whole sheet. It reached for the line and didn't cross. It held there, trembling, considering, like a dog at a threshold whose nose wrinkles because the floor smells like something it can't name. Then it slid back and the hum lowered, and the ordinary lake got louder